All right, welcome back to Almost Above Average, the show where we dive deep with the people who challenge the status quo and prove that greatness comes from resilience and reinvention. Today, we are joined by someone who's worn a lot of hats: an entrepreneur, an author, a sales leader, business coach, keynote speaker, and a true believer in the power of turning adversity into opportunity. Our guest, Steve Lentini, has helped countless teams and leaders find breakthrough growth, but what truly sets him apart is the journey he's traveled to get here. From humble beginnings to thriving in business to life-changing wake-up call that reshaped his entire outlook. So Steve, before you became known for transforming mindsets and building leaders, what was life like for you growing up, and what experiences steered you towards the path you're on today? And welcome.
Thank you, Chris. And that's a heck of a question. There's a lot of dialogue that could come there.
Well, where
So
did
let
you
me
come
start.
from? That's more what I was asking is, what is the origin story of Steve
Yeah,
Lentini? Where did he come
yeah.
from?
Well, I'm one of seven children. Um, I'm number six of seven. My number seven is my identical twin brother. And I wish he was here today because then we could have that debate whether we really are identical. And
Or who's better looking, right?
well, yeah, he probably is. I'll give him that. So we were 4 minutes apart, and my mother had a cerebral hemorrhage, and she was told, my father was told, take her home, and she'll die at home. That was 1952. And so she didn't even know she had two babies until a year later when she woke up. And what she said was, she said, well, I met Christ, and he said, you got to go home. You got to go back. And that same day she woke up. She woke up shortly thereafter. And she outlived everybody that told my father that she wouldn't live long. She lived till 94, and there was no one alive at that point. No one in my father's family. She outlived
Yeah, lived
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah, including the doctors and nurses for sure.
Man.
So she went to work when we were seven. She was 50, and she was an amazing human being. She um,
She
helped
joined the
my
workforce
father.
at 50 years old.
She joined the workforce at 50 years old. She went to work in a laundry for minimum wage, running V presses. She was 4'11", so they had a stool for her, and ordinarily would come home with burns on her arms and think marks on her from working in the laundry. And she did a lot of tasks, not just running these big hot V presses, she called them. But anyway, she was an amazing woman in that until I brought my shirts to the laundry in Middletown, Connecticut, Four City Laundry, it was called at the time. I'm not sure if it exists anymore. But anyway, um, they said, "Oh, Lentini are you related to Rose?" I said, "Yeah, she's my mother." They said, "Do you want to go back and see her?" I said, "Sure, of course, I want to go back and see her." It was the first time I was bringing my own clothes at 18 years old, going to the laundromat, and I mean going to the dry cleaner and laundry to take care of my own stuff because my mother took care of it. Although we helped her, but she took care of it mostly. So anyway, I go back to see her, and as I'm walking back, I realize it's a little United Nations. And I never knew she only mentioned people's names. And then I remember both my mother and my father never spoke of race, only of humans, of people by names. And my father worked at the Connecticut Valley State Hospital. And when certain patients would get the okay to take a weekend or take an afternoon, my father brought home people, one guy that cut our hair, another guy that thought he was a policeman, but they were totally harmless. They were allowed to go until that hospital was shut down. Most state hospitals were shut down. They were considered warehouses. And it was just like, well, here's my buddy Tom, and here's Jim, who thinks he's a policeman, but he never said that. He had a police uniform on. They never described it or explained it. And the guy that cut our hair had a tick. I didn't know it was called Tourette syndrome because we were 8, 9, 10. He was cutting our hair, and every once in a while he would go, "Yes, yes," and your hair would get a little bit of an adjustment when he did that. But it was okay because my mother never said a word. She would straighten it out later. And they never spoke politics. They never talked about who they voted for. It was very different when you think of today's world, and they
Yeah.
didn't make people wrong. That was something that was just natural about my mother. And she would always tell us, before you say something about someone, think about what good would it do. And so that was her caution. And then after my father was dead 13 years, I asked my mother for the reason of the age gap of all the children, because when I was born, my oldest brother was 19. I had a sister who was 18, a brother who was 16 years older, and a brother who was 14 years older. And then my brother Dave was 6 years older. And then my twin brother and I. And I said, "Hey, Mom, what's the reason for the gap in the kids?" She very calmly said, between bites of her ham sandwich, "That's because your father was missing for 5 years." I said, "What?"
What?
No one ever spoke of it. She said, I sat the kids down, who at the time I think were 8, 7, 5, and 2. And she said, Dad's coming home, and I don't want it ever mentioned because what good would it do? I mean, she lived that philosophy. The only thing was it led to everything getting swept under the rug, right? No one.
Right, and you guys got to be thinking of this growing up. Like, where's Dad been for?
Yeah, I didn't, because I wasn't born until after he got home. I'm grateful he came home. Right?
Right.
And my brother Dave wasn't born until after he came home. And apparently he had signed up for the Army. He had been in the Navy, and then he was out for a number of years, married my mother, and had the first 4 kids. And then he disappeared one night, said he lost his money in a card game and was embarrassed to come home. But he never reached out for 5 years. And they ended up in what was called World War II housing, or the projects. That's where they ended up, because my mother was on welfare with 4 children, and she didn't work. She just learned how to exist on whatever the state paid her at the time. And there was always this undercurrent, because my brother, when I was born, my oldest brother Seb, they're all passed except for my twin brother Stan and my brother Frank. Everyone else is gone. My brother Frank is going to be 89 this year. 88 nice. Or 89. So anyway, I said, called my brother Seb, who was in the Air Force. He was some kind of a master sergeant, tech sergeant. He had, the uniform when he came home. And I didn't meet him until I was 10, and he was 29.
Huh.
And I said
He's
later,
old enough to be your dad almost.
Yeah. And so I called him right away when I learned. And so he was, if I was, let's see, so 6 years after, if my father died in 83, so let's just say that Seb was 20 years older than me, 19 years older than me. So if I was 43, he was in his 60s. And I said, "Seb, how come you didn't say pass the green beans? And Dad, where were you all those years, by the way?" It never
had that conversation
up.
A little late in life, huh?
Yeah, it never came up. And he said, "Well, that's because Mom said we don't talk about things like that. What good would it do? Your father came home. We're not going to make him wrong." And I get that message because it's part of the work I do today. It's just very different, because now that was one of the reasons that led me to the work that I do and the writing that I do, talking about being real and being authentic and learning how to manage the mind with the idea of be careful when you want to be right, when it's very strong, wanting to be right, because what we forget is it makes everyone else in that moment wrong. And everyone around your table is probably 10% right at least. In other words, we could give people credit, have a dialogue instead of a fight and an argument, and say, "Okay, well, I hear you. All right, I'm not sure I agree with it, but let's talk about that. How did you come to that?" And so it led me to go to work for one of my brothers who owned a distribution business. I ended up owning a distribution business, then retail party stores. I actually also helped a few struggling guys get their books published. I produced a couple of movies that were, I raised the money with investors and told them, this is the kind of project that you picture this. When you picture a toilet swirling, I said, make sure you picture your money going down with it, because I wouldn't promise people anything. And it's because artists came to me and said, "Hey, can you help us raise money? We'd like to do a project." And so we did a number of them, including meeting a guy who his name was Ron Gorton. He actually produced Panic Button with Maurice Chevalier, Jane Mansfield, and Mike Connors, who ended up in Mannix. He gave Mike Connors his start, and then this was the last project, or the one before Jane Mansfield lost her life, sadly. And what I didn't realize at the time, when we were raising money for another project he had an idea for, is we couldn't rent the movie, couldn't find it anywhere. And if we had, what it was Ron Gorton's life story, raising money from people for projects that ultimately failed, and that's what Panic Button was about. It was the
That
first.
ultimately failed.
It was the first concept of producers.
Well, how do I get involved? I got plenty of projects that need money that might fail. Let's go.
Well, and Ron certainly was good at that because he raised money, and he also did it. He raised money telling people they all owned 100% of the project, which we discovered when we raised money for a movie called. It was a documentary called Autopsy, and it was everything that happened to the body after death, including solving crimes. So there were medical examiners in it, but many other people.
Was it a
And
documentary?
it was a documentary, and he went to Dr. James Baden or Michael Baden. I think it's called Baden, Michael Baden in New York City, who was the New York City medical examiner at the time, and he sold him the concept too, and it appeared on HBO
Nice.
while we were doing our project, and we changed the name from Autopsy to A Walk with Death. At Ron's, the producer, Ron Gorton, God bless, he's gone, God rest his soul, at his urging, and we wondered why. Why was he urging us to change the title? Is because he had sold it to Dr. Baden and HBO, and we didn't have enough money to go after HBO, and they produced 6 episodes of Autopsy. So the Walk with Death never got. He finished it. It just the investors couldn't trust each other. In fact, one of the guys called me. He owned a sanitation company in Newark, Chester Pasillo. He's also passed, and he called me 2 years after it was done. He said, "Steve, the movie's in the can. Can you please be the guy? We'll put up some more money. Can you be the guy that manages it and advertises it?" And I said, "Chester, I've got 2 young children, and little did I know, a month later, I was going to learn I was going to have a third child. I had twins. I have twin daughters and a son, and it's a good thing I did because we had literally 3 children in 11 months. I said,
You
"Yeah,
have
I
the
got
twins? You had the
babies. They're
twins
a
first?
month old." Yeah,
You had the twins first?
yeah. I had the twins first, and a month later, in between, Chester Pasillo called me and said, "Can you market this thing and do it?" And I said, "No, I got 2 young babies. I had twins.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it." And
Not for 3 years at least.
yeah, maybe
Maybe
it
more.
didn't happen at all. So they agreed to that and just let it go. And it never got
So it's
produced.
produced and finished, and it's just sitting on a database somewhere.
Sitting somewhere, who knows where. And I did Prisoners of Rock and Roll with Captain Lou Albano. I raised the money for that,
Okay.
and that
What
turned
was
out to
that?
be that was only $35,000 or $50,000. It wasn't a lot of money, but Captain Lou Albano was the tag team champion. He and Tony Altomare. Lou Albano he was quite a character because at the time he had a little beard and a goatee, and he had paper clips. He had holes punched in his cheeks, his nose, and he had paper clips with rubber bands, and of course he had a lot of earrings. But he was a wonderful human being. In fact, Cyndi Lauper managed him at the time, and it's a good thing. He tried to convince us to raise more money to get Cyndi Lauper to appear. It's a good thing we didn't. It would have been embarrassing for all of us. But anyway, we had some fun doing it. They didn't make any money.
Well,
In the
now you have
meantime,
experience too, right? You have
yeah,
experience.
yeah. So in the meantime, I sold my distribution business, and I went to work for the people that bought my company, and I worked for them for 16 years. Wonderful people, salt of the earth people, the Baum family. I worked for Jerry Baum and his wife, Louise. And Jerry passed from pancreatic cancer. And a few years later, his wife passed from pancreatic cancer. And little did I know that would have an impact on my life because they mentioned Dr. Peter Banks, who was a pancreatic renowned doctor at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And little did I know, flash forward a number of years later, after they passed away, I left the company that I was working for that had purchased my distribution business and started the Sandler sales training license. It was like a franchise. And 5 years after doing that, one day I'm doing a seminar. 1 second I was fine, never had any symptoms. The next second I needed an ambulance. It felt like I had been shot
Like while
in
you're on
the
stage?
yeah while I was doing the work.
Man.
I felt like I had been knifed in the stomach or shot. Literally, that's what it felt like. And I remember telling my assistant, "Hey, I got to go." And other people that came to visit me in the hospital later said, "You also said I'm not sure if I'll ever be back." Which I didn't remember. But while I was waiting for the ambulance, the people in my office were asking me how I was doing. I said, I don't know how my body's doing. And I'm grateful. I had this overwhelming sense of gratitude. It was November 18th. It'll be 23 years. As I reflected back on it later, I realized it was also this feeling of a divine worldly presence, because I wasn't concerned at all with the future. It was only the now. I knew my body was struggling. And then when the EMTs came and asked me the same question, I said, I don't know how my body's doing. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful. And you could see the look in their face. It was like, oh man, this guy needs an
He's
ER
crazy.
doctor. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And a shrink.
definitely that.
Yeah. So anyway, they brought me to the hospital, and I was in intensive care right away. It turns out, I learned later, I didn't know what was going on. I learned later that my pancreas had exploded from a blockage in the pancreatic duct. And the first thing they ask you in the hospital is, how many times have you had pancreatitis? How much do you drink? Because it is associated often with people who drink a lot. I said, I just have a glass of wine, maybe on the weekends, not every weekend. And
Barely drink at all.
yeah, and I had never had any attacks, pancreatitis attacks, and so they didn't know what it was. But 5 days later, little did they know too that when your body expels all of its pancreatic enzymes into your body cavity, that's what happened. They literally exploded out of the pancreas, and they don't forget that their job is digestion. So they were digesting my inner organs,
That's
and
true. Yeah.
and the body fills you. It filled me with water.
Pancreas doesn't know what's around it. It just does what it does.
Yeah, it does what it does. It's contained in the duct, and then it secretes the enzymes as the food comes, right? As it's instructed, right? It's time for digestion. Well, here they are in my body cavity, and my body blew up with 30 pounds of water, and they were concerned about having it get released. And they tried all the usual methods. They insert a catheter and all that stuff. For some reason, my body would not let go of the fluid. There's probably something to do with the universal intelligence, right? The one that's much greater than my own intelligence.
Amen.
And 5 days later, I flatlined from an anterior myocardial infarction.
In the
And I was
hospital.
in the hospital. And I was in a very small hospital. I was 2 hours, not as the crow flies, but in traffic outside of Boston from my home in Beverly, Massachusetts. They took me to Waltham, Mass, because that's where my other office was in Waltham, Mass. And it was 5.5 weeks before they decided, maybe, would you like a second opinion? And I said, I heard the name Dr. Peter Banks, which I had heard from the Jerry and Louise Baum, who had purchased my company. And the endoscopic guy that was my doctor at this little hospital said, "Oh my God, I studied under him." And I said, "Well, where's surgery on these options you're giving me?" "Oh, we don't do surgery. So we better call Dr. Peter Banks for you right away." And 20 minutes later, he called me on my cell phone. "Mr. Lentini?" "Yes, Dr. Peter Banks. I'm sending an ambulance. We're coming. You need surgery tomorrow." And
Dang.
and that was 5.5 weeks later. Turned out it was December 23rd.
Man.
And
So you already
Dr.
flatlined and now you're going back to the hospital.
Yes, yes. I little did I know it was going to be 100 days altogether in the hospital, 60 days straight, and 40 out of the next 60. And little did I know on the fifth day I would flatline and get a glimpse of what's next, which is truly amazing. 1 second with two friends at the end of my bed who were visiting. The next second I was one with God, one with the infinite, one with
Universe.
immense glory, light, base. The words, Chris, do not do it justice. They do not describe the experience. And it was like a play. There was no past or future, only the now on steroids. I call it the now on steroids. And the other thing I noticed is I have the trademark for the acorn brain. That little voice that's in it, as far as I know, it's in everyone's head. At least when I ask people, when I
Guilty.
speak, I'll say, how many people by a show of hands have that little insidious voice in their head that talks to them constantly, sometimes 24 hours a day, sometimes interrupting our sleep, our comfort. And many raised their hands to my, the first time I asked that question, I was like, I'm glad I'm not the only one with that voice.
Yeah, that would have felt silly if you asked the crowd and no one's like, yeah, no one.
Silence.
Yeah. I
No,
guess I need a new career.
yeah, you're the only one. That'll have been my first and last speaking engagement.
Right.
So it didn't go with me. That voice didn't go with me. And you don't have the kind of thinking that says, wow, I don't have that little voice. You don't have the human consciousness. So from here to there, what I went into is beyond human comprehension, which is also mentioned in a number of places in the Bible. Where we go from here is beyond human comprehension, beyond our understanding. I think that's in Romans, one of the verses. I have it in my book, Sage Advice, that I wrote 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's 4 years ago. But anyway, so all immense light, grace, and mercy beyond what we can comprehend. And then there was a next scene, which was my life review, and only the good I had done. So I sensed the presence of family and friends that had passed on, and then people I had helped buy sandwiches for, given money to in the street, helped move, and of course, family and friends, all the remembrance of the times I helped them, and even people I smiled at. I had no idea that I had touched so many lives, and I'm embarrassed to say I was 50. Only the lives I had touched flashed before me. And, it made sense to me. Now, I was going to be a priest until I was 16 or 17. I met Sophie on the high school bus, and I knew, wow, priesthood is not Catholic priesthood anyway. This is not going to be a good idea.
Nope, that's not going to work for me.
No. So I did study many of almost as many faiths as I could: Hindu, the Vedic traditions, Kabbalah, the Torah, and the Jewish faith, and of course the Kabbalah is based on Orthodox Jewish work. I studied, of course, as many of the different Christian sects, and as well as Muslim. Right, I studied Muhammad and his work and writings, and in the Bible, what you see is Christ. I think it's Paul that writes that Christ basically said his message was that everything works together for good for those who believe in the Father. Muhammad said something fascinating. What reaches you was never meant to miss you, and what misses you was never meant to reach you, which is very much like everything works together for good.
Beautiful.
And what reaches you was never meant that what misses you was never meant to reach you is about lamenting things that as humans we want. And then it doesn't show up the way we pictured. It's like Buddha saying desire is the root of all suffering. So we lament things that haven't shown up, and we don't give credit that that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. And then the things that reach us were never meant to miss us, whether it's good or bad. See, only this brain does that, defining things as good or bad. It just is. It was never meant to miss us. And I made sense of that along with everything working together for good. And that created a big foundation for my work. I'll ask people, okay, let's take a pause for a minute. Separate yourself, if you can, from the story of they did this to me, this boss did that to me, the company did this to me, the bank didn't give me money, I went out of business, I went bankrupt, blah, blah. Let's get away from the story, what I call the BS story that you're believing from your mind.
From your acorn brain.
Yeah, from the acorn brain. And let's get into what could be the gift in this. What could be the gift in it?
That sounds like it was started from your mom's way of being, where she didn't want to speak about things if they didn't do any good. That sounds like it was kind of started way back then. Like it's very ingrained in who you are.
Yes, that's part of it. And that's also, right, the fact that it was a suppressed dialogue for all those years, it wasn't the truth, is where I help people. Let's get to the truth, right? Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your adulthood. Tell me about everything that's happened in your life. And typically people that haven't done any of my work or met me, they go into what I call the complaint and grievance mode. They're going to tell me everything that happened to them.
Everything that sucks.
Yeah, everything that happened to me. And then I tell them, all right, let's write that down. They write it down for me. And I say, now go back and wherever you put another name or a they, put in your name and read it back to me. And some people, I would say 80% get it and say, okay, yeah, this is me. I get it. It's all me. And let's look for how it was for you. Can we go back and reflect on what happened then and what's happened now that might not have happened without those things that you're complaining about? Because typically when people go back, they say, upon reflection, if that wouldn't happen, I wouldn't have got here. And if that didn't happen, then I wouldn't got here. And then if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here now.
Yeah.
That it
A
all
million
made
stories like that.
sense. So I ended up, after 6 months out of work, I ended up giving up that license for the National Sales Training Program because my brain for a couple of years had been telling me this is never going to be your own work. You have to do your own work. And it was a very still, small voice. It was like a feeling. It didn't come with 76 trombones and a marching band, right? You know, say, hey,
Very
Steve, you got to
soft
go
voice.
do your work. It was just a little quiet voice that was like an urging inside that I could do my own work. And of course, this brain was telling me, no, who you? You can't write a book. You can't do any of this stuff. After I got out of the hospital, and many miracles happened while I was in the hospital. I got $24,000 came in the mail, as people heard. The Peter Banks was not the surgeon. He was also an endoscopic doctor. And he said to me, Steve, I'm going to get you Dr. Stanley Ashley, who's the head of the surgery department for Harvard University and the medical school. He teaches this stuff. He does these kinds of surgeries. And I got to go because I'm going to try to convince him to stay one more day because he's leaving for a ski vacation December 23rd and not coming back till January 2nd. And you need this surgery tomorrow. And the next morning, I'm laying in a stretcher waiting for the surgeon, and it's Dr. Stanley Ashley. And I said,
Nice.
Doc, thank you so much. I'm grateful. And he said, you're very calm. I said, well, Doc, your job is surgery. My job is recovery.
Yeah.
But he also didn't know at the time that I had already experienced passing to the other side. And like I said, I was grateful the moment I got in the ambulance 5 days early and never thought about, could this be it? And it wasn't about being afraid. It was as if I knew I was safe no matter what, either way. And the ambulance people were surprised because I wasn't screaming, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Please, please, please. Instead, I'm saying, I'm grateful. I don't know what's happening in my body. And I relate it maybe today as the result of all the work I did studying all the different faiths and having a belief always that God was not vengeful. The creator of an infinite universe. How could that energy be petty and small-minded?
To create
That's
everything that has ever existed. Yeah, that doesn't come from a guy not thinking about stuff.
No.
Or not a guy, but
At least in my opinion at the time. Now, maybe our thinking is so powerful that I had that experience on the other side because I'd never believed in a vengeful, angry God and questioned the idea, even as a small child and an adolescent, of the idea of sins. I mean, aren't we supposed to make mistakes? Aren't we supposed to fall? Which Christ fell and got up, and that's what we're supposed to do in life: is fall, get up. That's what we're here to. No one's tracking our sins, in my opinion. That does upset some people because they say, "Well, then people will misbehave." I say, "No, how?" Because what was mentioned in my life review was all the good I had done, and then I asked people, "How do you feel when you do good?" Except for one guy who said, "I don't know. I guess I feel good." Everyone has answered, "Yeah, I feel good when I do
But
good."
even that
Why?
sounds disingenuous that he doesn't when he says that he doesn't feel good. It's kind of
Yeah,
like, well,
I suspected he just didn't want to admit it because he was a
right,
tough
it's
guy.
one of those things.
Yeah, he was
It's
a
like I
tough
could
guy.
see it. I
Yeah,
know what doing good things feels like, man.
yeah, yeah. And so everyone feels good when they do good. What's the reason for that? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to do good. And the way to have good is to overcome this brain that judges everybody and everything and makes them right or wrong or bad or good or separates them into nationalities or races or sexes or sexual preference. When I left my body, there was nobody saying, well, Steve, let's see, hold on. What's your sexual preference? What are your pronouns? What's your
Yeah.
faith? What country are you
Is
from?
the surgeon black? Is it?
Yeah, right,
Yeah, none
right.
of that.
No, because we're all one. This is the human ego, right? Edging God out, that wants us to be right, that thinks small-minded. And if it's small-minded, it didn't come from the creative life force called God for me, but you could call it goddess or the Buddha or the Abraham or the Muhammad or the Christ or the Vedics, the Hindu traditions, or you could call it anything you want, the Brahma or the quantum field for atheists or scientists who don't believe in a God. There's something, we live in something so amazing. It's so far beyond our human comprehension and understanding that's what I got a glimpse of. And I don't know why me? And I never feared death. It didn't matter to me whether I left here and stayed there, because I can tell you, after the life review, I was asked a question:
Can I share a
stay
story with you
or
in that
go?
similar vein? I had a similar experience. I don't know if I passed. I didn't pass to the other side, but it's kind of a dark story. So I apologize, listeners.
No,
But
that's okay.
before I got sober, I had tried to commit suicide
Mm-hmm.
a couple times. So I ended up
Mm-hmm.
in a hospital once. It was really bad. But 4 days before I moved out to North Carolina, like I had all the anxiety. I was afraid to move. I was afraid of everything that was to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, screw it, I'm not going to do it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
went, got a rope, drank myself to oblivion, found a tree near a lake, and I was ready. Tied it off, tied it to me, and I was sitting over at the Washoe Lake, overlooking the Sierra Nevada mountains, and I had just calm and peace. And right beforehand, I was like tying ropes off. I'm anxious. I'm moving.
Yeah.
I have a lot of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm ready to do it, and everything in me just like everything stops, and I'm looking over these overcast mountains, and I didn't hear it. I
Mm-hmm.
felt words. It
Mm-hmm.
just don't do it. That's all it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was I felt words. I didn't hear it, but I could feel it. It was such
Yeah,
a
it's
weird
a feeling.
experience,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it made me feel like a loser. I was like, I can't even freaking kill myself, and I like got up and I left. But
Yeah. Thank God
I was an
you're
atheist at
here.
this point. I was an
Yeah.
atheist during that.
Yeah.
My journey to God came from the 12 steps in AA. Like my journey to God, I first started calling a doorknob God because I didn't want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, it was just a habit because they told me to do it. So I was just following instructions. But over
Mm-hmm.
time, I start to notice coincidences and just things that shouldn't be happening that can't really be explained. And that's kind of how I have a concept of
Yeah.
God. So that's
Yeah.
God to me. But
Yeah.
anyway, I wanted to share that with you about the experience. That's what
Well,
I think God was.
well, and what you experienced, David R. Hawkins has written about it. He's no longer with us, but and his life journey became talking to people about this, and he eventually became a psychologist and did a lot of research, and he wrote a number of books where he talked about he had, starting as a youth, experiences that you just described. What he said was you don't have to have a near death experience to experience God, the divine, the goddess, whatever it is you call it. You can experience what's next in this life as a human. He had multiple experiences that he writes about in his various books, where he describes exactly what you said, that it's a peace and understanding, something that overcomes you. And that's really where I was before I had 5 days later the near death experience, waiting for the ambulance. I was grateful, and
You had the
I
next
was
step.
I was already in that, what David R. Hawkins. If I didn't have the near death experience 5 days later, I would have been saying, "Listen, I all I can tell you is I was grateful, grateful waiting for the ambulance, grateful when the EMTs came, grateful when I got to the hospital, and mostly grateful for the whole 100 days.
I can tell you're
Mostly
telling the
grateful."
truth too. Like you're saying that very genuinely.
I had a priest get come into the Waltham Hospital, admitted in the bed next to me, and the priest said to me, "How is it that you're so grateful?" I said, "Oh, Father, what awaits us is just absolutely amazing." So he came in maybe 2 weeks after I had been in the hospital. At that point, I had had the near death experience. But I said, "So what's happening, Father?" And he said, "Well, I've got cancer, and I've got a tough road ahead and a diagnosis of that." I said, "Well, I can tell you, um, be in the moment. That's the way for me to be grateful, is just be grateful for today." And that's all I can say, Father. And he was really an amazing guy. His name was Father Joe, and he said, "Make sure that we stay in touch." And then I learned a few weeks later that he had passed. And but he actually used the gratitude and being in the moment. That really, the other thing I learned is we only have now. And what this brain does is it takes us away from the now. It takes us because it has an advantage over us. It remembers every humiliation, every error in judgment, every mistake we made, every place we fell, and it reminds us of it. I'm driving down the road and something happened in the second grade, and it reminds me. The brain reminds me of it. I'm 73 now, October 10th, right? It's like,
You look
thank
great for
you.
73.
Well,
Dang.
thank you. Thank you, brain, for sharing. And then today, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I laugh at myself because that's what I've learned and what I teach about reprogramming the mind to be grateful and be here now and to stop and look around and count your blessings as often as you can during the day, especially when this brain gets active, because it reminds the brain that there is so much more possible than all of the little small minded things that we see every day, including from our leaders, sadly, right? That our leaders are doing this, pointing fingers, blaming this, making each other wrong. Then they're expecting the general population to behave differently. If our leaders are modeling that kind of behavior, it's not surprising that their constituents and the citizens are doing the same, because we don't have people that are having a dialogue, saying things like, yeah, I disagree with the guy, but we're having a dialogue and we're going to come to a compromise for the benefit of the people, or the benefit of the company, or the benefit of my neighborhood, or the benefit of my next door neighbor. No one's as bad as you think they are, and no one's as good as you think they are, because we're
100%.
all human. We're
Yeah.
all flawed. There's no elite group because you got 19 letters after your name and you went to school for 25 years. That doesn't make anyone better than anyone. None of us are superior to anyone nor beneath anyone. And when we can get over ourselves, John Maxwell says that a lot. When we can get over ourselves, because that's our job, is to get over ourselves and really appreciate, why did God make it this way? Well, it's this way. Life is organized this way so that we can learn and grow from the chaos and the conflict and the challenges and what this brain suggests. Now, the key is we don't have to believe this brain. We don't have to. And we can reprogram it.
When did you discover that you could reprogram the acorn brain? How old were you?
Well, before I went in the hospital, I read Dr. Srikumar Rao, Are You Ready to Succeed? And he talks about developing a level of thinking above your thinking, becoming the observer of your life. I'm not sure I understood that totally until I had the near-death experience, when I realized, wow, we have it all wrong. At least I do. I don't suggest everyone has it wrong. And I don't think religion's bad. I think it's wonderful. Faith, anything that gives humans faith in something larger,
Yeah,
is wonderful.
necessary. Definitely
But
necessary.
when it sounds small-minded, when the claims come that it's the only way, there's one way, and you better be good. No, we're here to make mistakes and fall, and there's many ways. I think Christ said, "There's many rooms in my Father's house," and I think that was his message. That don't worry, right? Whatever you believe, you will find God, and we have no choice, right? All of us have a death sentence when we're born. We're all going to go back to where we came from, and we're all going to discover what it is. Now,
Hopefully.
hopefully, well, I would say yes, because I've studied near death experiences since, and some have experienced hell. They experienced hell, and it could be because they've always been afraid of hell, and that our thinking is so powerful that whatever we experience next could be because what we believe and what we fear.
Because of our habits that we've trained ourselves to believe over our
Yeah,
lifetime. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm spending this whole time period of my life right now is unlearning all the stuff from the past, or
I love that.
re-looking at everything and deciding what I need to keep and what I need to get rid of.
Yeah, yeah. Many masters over the centuries have said we have to unlearn and reprogram our minds. I mean, go back to Plato and some of the early Greek philosophers. They all said something similar about reprogramming the mind and not believing the brain. Something I laugh at, Cicero said in like 140 BC or something like that, or maybe it's 140 AD, but anyway, it's in my book, Sage Advice. He said, politicians aren't born, they're excreted. Well, that's funny, only because it tells me over 2,000 years ago people were mad at politicians, but humans still haven't learned to do anything about it. We haven't voted for people that say that. Who's
No,
going to
that's
have a
not true.
dialogue?
We have learned that we want to be upset at people
Yes,
in power. That's what
yes,
we've learned.
good point. Chris, we have. That's exactly what we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, but that's another power of the small-minded thinking, right? That's what I talk about in my work is our job is to overcome that small-minded thinking, all those places that we're limiting and we're talking about others and we're complaining about whole groups of people, races, sexes, sexual preferences, the neighbors, the boss, the company. It's all BS because we're not grateful for what's the gift in it. Because life is for us, not happening to us. We can think that it's happening to us. It's not happening to us. And until we get to that place where it's happening for us, where we realize it and we look for the gift, then we're always going to be in the story. We're going to look for reasons to make people wrong. We're not going to spend our time doing good because we're going to find a reason to do whatever, make others wrong, bang somebody over the head with a sign, or whatever it is. We're going to find an excuse to do it because, after all, I'm right.
That's it. We're all trying to be right in this world. What are some tips that you have that you practice to reprogram your brain? I do one thing. I brush my teeth with my non-dominant hand every day now. I have for like the last eight months.
That. Yeah. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff used to say that to make sure that you do things opposite of what you normally do. Notice your patterns, like brushing your teeth left-handed, brush your teeth right-handed. Put the right-hand sock on every day. Well, put the left one on first. But to do other things every day. If you write left-handed, write right-handed for a while, only because his theory was it would teach you to observe. Now, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff did many other things. But I like Rainer Maria Rilke, who called the voice in his head in the 1800s. He called it the little hooligan. And he would ask people, are you going to let the little hooligan run you, or will you run it? And that's the key, is first to notice who triggers us, who bothers us, who activates us, what events upset us, because those are the gifts. They're teachers. They're actually teachers. If we can
stop reacting and analyze.
Yeah.
Instead of meditation, I found that skill, how I use that in my days. Like, I found that through meditating.
Yeah.
Like, the practice of meditating for me is me stepping outside and just looking at my thoughts and then letting it go,
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of developed at least I can judge myself in real time now.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. That's, meditation. I think also adding, noticing what triggers you, who and what, because events trigger us and people trigger us. And noticing begins reprogramming the mind, because until we notice, it's like driving. And neuro researchers are talking about this, that until the age of 35, if we don't do anything to reprogram our mind, neuro researchers can predict your next 35 years, because you will do the exact same things over and over, maybe different people, different events, but if they trigger the same feelings, the brain just says, we got this. Just like driving. When you first learn to drive, you're nervous. You're paying attention to everything. 2 years later, you don't know who's driving. The subconscious takes over. But what we didn't realize for many years is that it takes over in emotional training, and it becomes automatic unless we stop and notice. Because the minute we notice, the brain says, oh, he's not reacting. He's noticing this person triggered him. Then when you go to the next level of, all right, wait a minute, this event or this person is my teacher. What's the gift in this? What are they trying to teach me? What can I learn? Now, if you want to complain that the store clerk is an obnoxious idiot, okay, fine. And if you're upset, the only caution I would have is, have you ever been an obnoxious idiot to anyone anywhere? Because it doesn't apply to the store clerk always, right? It applies to, have you ever been an obnoxious idiot anywhere? When I first learned that a number of years ago by a coach I had for 20 years, I had to stop and say, yeah, you know what? I have been an obnoxious idiot. And what happened is I realized that person was there to wake me up to it, and not to be so angry and upset with people that are a little bit different, right? A little bit.
You change blaming into analysis in your life.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful trigger. That's like a habit switch almost.
Now, do I do it every day? Have I found the way? I tell my clients, if I ever tell you I found the way to reprogram this mind perfectly, put it in a roadmap and say, everybody can follow this and we will now all be in nirvana. No, I
Here's
tell
the
them
$1
run
million
away.
button. Just hit it on my website.
Right. Yeah, right. I tell them, if I tell you I found the way, run away. No one has the way. No one has the way. It's each individual journey. And when we can come to appreciate, imagine trying to appreciate 8 billion journeys. But if we get over ourselves, we could appreciate very many journeys. And I have one other goal. I want to love one person, one, between now and the time I pass to what's next again, as much as I felt loved in that moment. It's very challenging to do in the human body because it's way beyond our understanding. If we all had an experience of what's next and got to come back, not before this podcast is over, by the way, we wouldn't be so petty. We'd come back and say, well, thank you, God. And that force, that life force, and for me it's God, but whatever anyone wants to call it, is never absent. It's present 100% of the time, because if you think about it, we're floating on a ball in a we call it a universe, but really what it is energy, which physicists would tell you, right, is just evolving, growing, changing energy. And how could whatever created it just say, I made it. All right, next. It's here with us always. The divine is never absent, except when we get angry, when we listen to this brain and we judge and we get angry and we complain. And neuro researchers are actually doing now facilitated MRIs, fMRIs, where they're watching new neural pathways develop as people reprogram their mind from mostly negative and mostly complaining and mostly grievances. When they give them a program to help them reprogram to positive or non-judgmental, just observing, they actually see new neural pathways opened on the opposite side where the negative neurons light up. They're
How do they do that
actually
in
proving it.
a? How do they do that test? How do they test that?
It's a facilitated MRI. fMRIs, they're called. And they actually give people the exercises and the work. And I don't know how often they come in. They must come in frequently. Stanford did some of this work, but many others are doing this work now,
Nice.
especially the last 5 or 6 years. And they're proving that new neural pathways are opened. And that's the place that the brain now starts to default to more often, the
Sounds like a cure
positive.
to depression right there.
It could be, I guess. I'm not a doctor.
I mean,
And Dr. Daniel Amen is got another fascinating. He's doing research. He's a double board certified psychiatrist and a neuro researcher. Dr. James Doty, who wrote Mind Magic, another neuro researcher. Joe Dispenza's done some of this work. Shirzad Shamin has done some of this work with Stanford. He invented or came up with, developed the PQ program, which is again a program about reprogramming the mind. And fascinating how, as they stay with people during the reprogramming, that they're finding that they more often default now to the opposite of what they used to do. In other words, the brain only said, you get angry when you see Mary, or see people like Mary. And then they started to question those thoughts and reprogram it and say, wait a minute, what is it about
why am I
Mary?
mad at Mary?
Yeah, why am
Maybe
I?
I don't hate Mary. Yeah, I get
Right.
that. So it sounds like they do a fMRI, send them out into the world with some instructions, like, hey, when this happens, do this. When this happens, do this. Come back, and they're seeing new neural pathways being formed. That is
Well, and they facilitate the MRI. So some of the MRIs, they're actually giving them the exercises and
okay.
they're watching the brain light up in new ways.
That's
So
interesting.
it's fascinating work. But what it's about is discovering our power if we leave behind our pettiness, if we leave behind the reason to make others wrong, right? If we bring the Christ consciousness with us everywhere, if we bring the ideas of enlightened being, or even if people can think of it this way, higher frequency versus lower frequency. R.J. Spina has written books about super consciousness, and he talks about the higher frequency and the lower frequencies. We know when we choose something that's lower frequency. We know because, we're going, oh man, I wish I hadn't said that to her, or I wish I hadn't gotten so angry. And we also know when we choose a higher frequency. And what they're saying about complaints and grievances is that it actually delays our own good. that it's electromagnetic interference. That's what
Huh.
R.J.
It's like
Pina
a
calls it.
physical
EMI.
impediment.
Yes. Now he's named it. I, for years, have just said, you sound like you're all wrapped up in complaints and grievances. You sound like a small bundle. And Ben Franklin said, if you're all wrapped up in a very tight bundle, you make for a very small person.
That's true.
I think here it is here. I think he said, oh, a person all wrapped up in themselves makes for a very small bundle. I have it here to remind me not to get all wrapped up in myself.
Nice. I like that. Well, before we get out of here, Steve, I do want to talk about the books. I want to talk more about your work, but we'll do it another time if you're willing. But tell
You
everyone
can be
about
a
your
guest
books and
on
the
my
podcast.
podcast. I'd love to
Yeah,
have you
yeah,
be a guest on mine.
absolutely.
We can continue this conversation from your perspective. I'd love to hear more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll tell everyone about the books and the podcast first.
Well, the podcast is different thinking for different times. I've done it for 6 years, and
I'm a fan, by the way. Also, I don't just listen to it because you're on my podcast. It has become a regular rotation now. I actually enjoy your content. So thank you.
I'm grateful. Thank you. And are you on Spotify as well?
Yep, almost above average. Speaking of which, hit subscribe if you made it this far in the video. I appreciate it.
Yeah, almost above average. Yes, I've got to make sure to make that part of my daily routine.
Please do.
I love the title, right? Almost above average. I mean, that describes in a way our human struggle, right? That it takes a little bit of work to become above average.
Right.
And you're almost there, and so am I. I'm almost above average. I'm not there yet, but it's a journey, right? And when we can get on that piece of looking and inquiry, we do find the gifts. At least in my experience, I have found many gifts, and I still find days and people and things to complain about. And I catch it though. I catch it and go, wait a minute here. This is a complaint and a grievance. And what I write about I have a book called No BS Coaching, where I write about, if you notice your complaints and grievances, what happens is they're delaying your good, right? So first you want to notice them, but there's two things you can do about complaints and grievances. One, if you can't control the situation or the person, you got to let it go. You got to just reprogram your mind, convince your mind, hey, let this go. We can't do anything about this. Even if you talk to yourself with your own name, hey, Chris, you got to let this go. And the brain hears that. The brain hears that differently. Dr. Amen, by the way, Dr. Daniel Amen, he writes about that. Then I wrote How to Train Your Mind, written by a dragon, because I'm born in the year of the dragon. So I took license with that. I wrote this last year before I knew the movie was coming out in the
Are you sure, Steve?
I did. The idea, it was one of those little small things that came into my head as a title. Hey, How to Train Your Mind, written by a dragon. And I thought, it was very quiet. I thought, okay, let me make a note. The next Sunday, that was on a Monday. That next Sunday, I wrote it. I woke up at 3 a.m. and wrote it.
Man.
And then I wrote, just last month, Your Brain is Brilliant, but it's not always your friend. Why your brain is not always a friend, and simple strategies how to change it. And again, my belief about self-help books and books with ideas to help people are they should be 70 or 80 pages or less. And not 200 or 300, because now you
want to make sure the person's going to finish the book, because if they can't finish the self-help book, then you messed up.
Yeah, and it isn't about me showing people what I know, because I know very little except experience. And that's what's helped me. I didn't finish college. I did go, but I've read, as you can see, I would say 90% of these books are read. The rest of them are glued in like they are at restaurants when you go to. Yeah. They're for show. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, these books, a lot of them are studied and flapped and tagged. And here's what I do. Here's Self-Observation by Red Hawk. I tag them, I flag them, I highlight them.
You're one of those readers. You got your sticky notes out.
And I use them in my work with people.
Right.
Yeah, books are wonderful. And so another book, by the way, that isn't mine, Don't Believe Everything You Think, by Joseph Wynn. My acorn brain, after I read this, said you have to sue him because he stole all your ideas. He only wrote this last year, and you've had these ideas for 20 years. And I laughed and said, no, we're not. God bless Doctor.
Why don't you guys rap battle? You can use my YouTube channel. You guys can rap battle. That'd be great.
Yeah, let's do that. Dr. Wynn, when did you get these ideas? Yeah. They were mine. Oh, mine.
That would be awesome.
That would be small-minded thinking. If anything has to be yours in the universe, by the way, we're all just leasing. And that's another thing people fight over. What's mine? We don't own anything here.
No, we're all just passing through, man.
Yeah. I was 50 and almost didn't pass through. again, right? I came to the other side. And you know who wrote about that in very similar fashion was Neil Donald Walsh. He wrote the Conversations with God series. And his last book was At Home with God, the final conversation. And in that book, he's asking God questions about death and what happens at death. And it's the last chapter. And during the whole book, God keeps telling him, you're not ready for the final question, because Neil Donald all through the book said, all right, so come on, tell us what happens when we die, what happens. God says, you're not ready for this. At the end of the book, and I'm reading this after I survived, a year or two, maybe 3 years later, and I get to the end and it says, all right, God, what's the final question? And God said, stay or go. And I was asked, stay or go. And my consciousness surrendered with thy will be done. Thy will be done. Didn't matter, stayed there, came back here, which was always my feeling, even waiting for the ambulance, but it didn't translate into anything official until I was asked that question, just like this, stay or go. And it's in your consciousness. You don't have a body. You're not communicating like you and I are. It's just a knowing. And I said, thy will be done. And I was right back in intensive care. And I asked my two friends, maybe an hour later, maybe longer, because I was just trying to process what the hell happened. And finally, I said to those same two friends, I said, hey, something happened. That's all I said. And they said, oh, yeah, your alarms went off. The nurses and doctors came running in. You were flatlining. And they said, out, this is it. Call his family. And they were out in the waiting room calling my family and friends. And sometime later, they estimated sometime around 20 minutes, the nurse came back out and said, okay, he's stable for now. You can sit with him. And they were back in the room when I regained consciousness and was back and stunned from the question, stay or go, and stunned from the life review that only mentioned the lives I had touched, and stunned from the immense light, mercy, grace, and also stunned later on thinking about how small-minded I was until that day.
What a beautiful
story. Very small-minded. And I still am, and I've improved. Almost above average, which I love.
There we are.
I'm almost above average. And it's a journey, and I'm enjoying the journey today, and I'm enjoying all the people that come that bother me, because now I say, oh, teacher, to myself, right? I may not say that to them. And I don't recommend in the shopping mall to talk to your brain. All right, brain, shut up. That's not true.
I do it. It's
better to do it. Better to do it in private.
Right.
But anyway, it's to live like that and say, okay, teacher, and pause and say, you might say, if someone's trying to argue with you, hey, I see you're upset. Talk to me. What's happening? What's going on? Was it me? Is it something I've done? Is it something I'm doing? Talk to me. Tell me. Just no reaction. Because we can still say even things like this. Hey, I am angry. I'm upset and I want to talk about it. That's very different than screaming and shouting and raising a hand, because it accomplishes, and we know this, it accomplishes nothing. We know it's lower frequency.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today, man. Tell everybody where to find you at. Steve at
SteveLentini.com. I'll show you how to spell it. So here's my name, Steve Lentini. Just add Steve at SteveLentini.com. And I don't want you to go out and buy anything. What I want you all to do is just spend a moment, count your blessings, be grateful, and do some good tomorrow. Do some good. Touch another's life.
Steve. That was a very good message.
You're welcome.
All right.
I'm grateful. So we'll schedule a follow-up.
Absolutely.
And you'll be on my podcast.
Absolutely. What was the name of the podcast? Different Things for Different People?
Different Thinking for Different Times.
Different Thinking for Different Times. I'll link to that in the show notes, and I am going to link to all your books. Sorry. I'm just going to do it anyway. I think your content is good, not just from this podcast, but everything you're putting out into the world is exactly what the Almost Above Average podcast is about. So
and if somebody would like me to come and speak, I'm glad to do it. If it's a not-for-profit or a group that's looking to raise money, I'm glad to do it for free. Okay. If it's a corporation that wants to excel times 10 and change the culture and have a group of people that are not just happy, but alive and authentic and learning how to deal with real situations, there might be a big fee for those companies.
Oh, good. Well, when McMedia Network is a big, large corporation, we'll elicit your services, and we'll get in the room with Steve Lentini.
And I'm going to do everything I can to help you.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you for being on Almost Above Average.
Discussing that. Okay.
You're welcome. All right, brother. We'll talk to you later.
Bye, Chris.